Thank you all for joining Talking with EDU Thompson. Today, we are discussing how to build relationships. Many schools across the country are not sure what school will look like this year, but we know that building relationship is key. So I brought together some great leaders that are always building relationships, and we're going to talk to them to see what they are doing. So let me know, who wants to start off? How are you building relationships?
I'll share. Something that I've been practicing has been the Platinum Rule, and we often lend ourselves to the Golden Rule, which was treat others the way that we would want to be treated. But for more of a culturally responsive lens, the Platinum Rule says that we should treat others the way that they want to be treated. So not always from my own perspective of what I would like in a relationship or what I would want, but more so getting to the nuts and bolts of what that person wants and needs in the relationship.
Yeah, I think that's so key, Phil, right? Because the relationships are two-way streets, right? So we have to make sure that we're not just framing how things go based on what our needs are or our wants, right? So it's really important to know your people, right? So know the people who you're working with, the people who rely on you, the people who you serve, right? And that will really end up doing well by you and for everybody else. I think another key piece for me that's been really kind of interesting to reflect on is the importance of getting comfortable or re-comfortable with "I don't know," right? Like as a phrase, right? And I think as a teacher, it took me a number of years to really feel comfortable saying that. And as I reflect on my work currently, it's just been fascinating. Like, yeah, you know, it's when you're in those leadership roles, you sometimes forget that, like, in order to build relationships, in order to build trust, you sometimes have to do things like say, look, I don't know where this is going to go, you know, but we're going to work through it all together. And here are some ways we're going to support each other through it. So it's been real fun for me to kind of reacquaint myself with that and realize the value of "I don't know," you know, particularly at a time where we don't, you know, there's a lot of questions that we can answer.
I'm hearing both of you speak. Phil, I love that idea of the Platinum Rule. And it made me reflect on myself because I'm actually an introvert. I have a very hard time starting conversations with people, which is very strange because of the work that I do. But I love meeting people. And I think about how much I appreciate when people come up to me and start a conversation and just say, hi, how are you? What brings you here? Tell me more about yourself. Or I noticed that you've done this in the past. And I try to be that for other people and push, like you said, Fred, kind of out of my own comfort zone and start that conversation because there might be other people who are like me. I always feel that I might be interrupting somebody or bothering them. And so how can I break out and be that first person who starts that? And Fred, you hit on trust. And I think trust is the essential and key ingredient to having any relationship. And so I think that with a foundational, you know, tell me more about you, how are you, or something that you like or respect or admire about that person. And I think, Phil, that goes into then the tell me more about you and what's important to you and your values and the culture aspect of it.
You know, one quick thing I'll share. I'm glad you brought up trust, Krista, because I feel, and I talk about it a lot, it's a key foundation for any relationship to form, right? For you to sustain relationships. It's also, I mean, I find personally the hardest relationship ingredient to build up, but the easiest to mess up, right? So you have to be like so careful with and take the time to really reflect on your actions, because in order for people to trust us, we have to prove that we're dependable and that our way of thinking really aligns with how other people think. But we can lose trust in so many ways, right? It's just so easy for people to say, oh, well, there you go. You know, it's now Fred is doing what maybe ultimately I thought he would do. And there goes that, right? So we have to be really, really careful about trust.
I think Brene Brown talks about that, and in her book Dare to Lead, and about it being marble jar moments, and you need lots of these little moments that build up trust, but it could take one slip. And so I think it's important to know that it's not just building relationships, but then how do you sustain them? And that, as you said, that's a hard piece. And I think that sometimes we're humans and, you know, we do make mistakes, but we have to keep working at that sustainability piece.
Yes, it's about withdrawals and deposits and just managing, or not managing, but maintaining those relationships and not keeping score, but keeping track of the exchanges between you and the person in the relationship.
Yeah, I've been curious, how are you guys doing this though in this like virtual setting? Because now we have this like new normal that's really testing how we're doing building relationships. So curious what you are doing to change things up. Or maybe you're not. Maybe you're going back to these same best practices, but curious what you're doing.
So I think for me, there are like elements of the same best practices, right? Like really emphasizing listening, you know, making sure there's opportunities to collaborate, you know, keeping it clear how much you respect and value people, right? Building up that trust. So that for me is a part of it regardless. What's a little bit different that I've found is I've built in a greater frequency of opportunities to gather because the water cooler moments aren't happening in the same way, right? The stopping in the hallway, the bumping into people, like that isn't existent in the same way. It's really kind of targeted and in a lot of ways has to be scheduled, right? I mean, certainly, you know, we can call people via phone, you know, and check in, and that's all very important, send text, etc. But in terms of our actual meetings, we've increased the frequency and in a lot of cases shortened the length of time, right? So more frequent check-ins and more opportunities to just see each other. So as a department, we come together more. The other thing we've done is added in some community and cultural aspects that people might normally have in their lives where a professional cohort wouldn't necessarily provide it. Sometimes, you know, it would, you know, sometimes we go out socially with people who we work with, but, you know, so for instance, to give you an example, we've held twice a month game afternoons, right? Where we've gotten together as a department and played games virtually, you know, categories, you know, charades, name that tune, things that probably as a department we wouldn't have scheduled under normal circumstances because there'd be a lot of opportunities for that in people's lives. And while some of that is gearing back up, you know, for some people, there was a need for our department to add to people's social outlets as well. Now, so those are a couple things that I've noticed.
In this virtual setting, it's changed up because I would go out and grab a cup of coffee with somebody and have a conversation, and we're not able to do that in the same way anymore. And so, as Fred said, I've worked on being very particular with scheduling. And while I feel like I have all this time, our time is used in different ways. And so I've looked into joining different online groups that are centered around business or social emotional learning or interests of mine to expand my group. But also those friends I keep in regular contact with will schedule weekly meetings for just a half an hour to do a Zoom, but we also keep up regularly on Voxer. And it's little things that can up our relationship a little bit, or text messages, you know, during the day, like, you've got this, you can do hard things, I'm with you, and funny gifts that we send each other that sustain us in between those times when we actually get to see each other face to face.
Yeah, I agree and co-sign on everything that's been said. You know, Fred just mentioned and being, you know, intentional and strategic of when you're connecting. You know, as Krista was saying, just those constant check-ins to stay connected throughout the day. I think for me, something that surfaced was just setting boundaries too. I think when we first started this remote learning, like the lines were really blurred and we were over communicating. We had text threads going. If we were Facebook friends, we had messages there. I just felt like I felt like I was working round the clock. You know, it was nothing to get a text at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, where that normally wasn't happening. And so once things began to settle a little bit, you know, we got a little more clear on just like boundaries, and it being something now to be off, like when you're off or you're taking a sick day or when you're taking annual leave, it's like, you're like, no, I'm really off the clock. like unless it's burning down, like, don't text me, you know? So I think you just have to be clear and intentional with expectations around when and how we are communicating to keep and maintain balance in the relationships.
I think that's a hallmark of a really healthy relationship, though, when you can express what your boundaries are or where you're struggling, and somebody can be respectful of that. I've had friends that we were to meet up and they just said, I'm having a really rough day today. Can we reschedule? Absolutely. I would rather do that because I care about you and your time. And so when you get to that point where you can put boundaries in place, I think that's a signal that you're in a good relationship with each other.
So we've talked a lot about trust. I'm curious how you have built trust with your staff, because that is, like Fred said, something that's really hard to do and you need to do it often. So curious, how have you built trust with relationships?
For me and the teams that I'm on, there's two ideas that we really leverage. One, I love looking at the Keirsey personality inventories, where you find out if you're more introverted, if you're more thinking or feeling, more sensing or intuitive, or more spontaneous and a planner. And because I think when we get a chance to share who we are and how we work and how we show up every day and what our needs are, it allows us to get to know each other, because we might not be able to articulate why it is that we're doing something. But if I knew, like, oh, you know, this person's an introvert, they're away just because they need a little bit of chance to decompress, that's good to know that they'll be coming back out when they're ready and energized to be back around again. I also, again, I mentioned Brene Brown. I love her core values activity that's in Dare to Lead. And the teams that I work with closely, we've done that core values activity. And part of that is, what are the two core values that guide you? And what does it look like when you're leaning into those values? And what does it look like when you're on a slippery slope with those values? And I think that it brings us together and gives us a better understanding of who one another is. And it also allows us to hold each other accountable. So the people I work with and my good friends can say, hey, Krista, I think you're slipping a little bit, or this is the behavior I'm seeing that you told me to watch for. And so that has worked on being able to bring us together and have a better understanding, knowing that we have the same vision and mission, just our pathway of getting there might look a little different.
I'll just jump in and share really quickly. One thing that our team has done has been similar to what Krista was saying around just personal inventories and assessments. We do things like DISC and StrengthsFinder, Myers-Briggs, and we get to know more about each other's strengths. We also did a book study around the languages of appreciation in the workplace by Gary Chapman. And so the more that we were able to kind of share, you know, the things that really speak to us, we're able to recognize, oh, it's not me, it's you, you know, more so like going back to what I said in the beginning around treating people the way that they want to be treated. So when a certain team member offers X, Y, and Z, oh, I know that they trust me because of that. And that's not normally how I would show trust, but that's their way of showing trust, and just being able to recognize those exchanges that we know are building trust with each other.
I think, Krista and Phil, you shared some really important pieces. I'll just share two kind of additional resources. So, you know, there's clearly, in terms of talking about trust, it couldn't be a more important time to talk about it. There was a recent Harvard Business Review article written by Francis Fry, and what he talked a little bit about was this idea of the triangle of trust, right? And so it's not anything that's going to be surprising, but the thinking behind it is that in order for people to trust you, they need to be able to understand your thinking, right? Like there's a logic pattern to what you do and a predictability, right? Because you'll never be able to earn anybody's trust if people can't imagine how you're going to react to a situation, right? That just breeds anxiety. There's also that people believe that you're you're who you say you are, right? There's a real and authentic nature to who you are and what you do, right? And that ties in with the logic too. And then the last piece is, and this ties into like elements of Kim Scott's work, if you've ever read Radical Candor, right? So this idea that I'm going to be fully transparent and open and honest with you, but I'm going to do it from a place of caring, right? Like you're going to know that even if you don't love what I'm going to share, right? And even if it makes you angry, you know that I'm sharing it because I have a real personal interest in your success and real like emotional connection with you, right? And so I think that that's like an important thing, right? How do we make sure that we're authentic with people? How do we make sure that we express our care for people? And then how do we, make sure that we can be predictable, right? That we're really logical in the actions we take. And I think if those ingredients are there, then you stand a better chance of building that trust, even in like totally out of control situations like the pandemic.
And I think that's where the core values comes into, because when you can identify what it is that you stand for and stand by, it allows you to take actions based on that, which is a sense of logic, if I'm making that connection, and it becomes authentic because people know what is important to you, and they know that you're going to make decisions and respond in ways that are aligned with what you say is important.
One more thing that I would like to share. It's interesting in kind of my reading on trust. It's like trust can be situational. And so I may trust you to create this Google form, but I may not trust you to pick up my groceries or watch my kid. So we do have to be when we're communicating what we trust and what the elements around the relationship that we are trusting this person with. Sometimes it's helpful to be clear in communicating like where that trust is coming from or what it is that we are entrusting in or looking for more trust in certain areas with people, and just being specific and intentional.
There's a model that a mentor of mine created. His name is Tom Stecker, and he calls it levels of relationships, and they're concentric circles. So out in the bigger side is anyone, just people you see walking on the street. And then the next level in is an acquaintance. And we talk about how do you move somebody from an anyone to an acquaintance, and you have shared interests perhaps, or you're involved in the same activities. And then the next level is friend or friend-like. And there's an increased level of trust, more regular communication. The next level in is like intimate or best friends, like closest friends, and then yourself. And I describe it to students as like being in a castle, and there's a moat between each level, and you get to put down that drawbridge and let people move in these levels. And so you get to control based on the situation, based on your level of, on the logic and the authenticity and the care that you're feeling from somebody, how close you let them come in. And not everybody needs to be in that intimate piece, but our goal is that we should all be in that friend-like stage where we treat each other with respect and compassion and kindness.
And I'd say the concentric circle idea is really important too, right? Because as you visualize it, with each of those circles getting slightly smaller, there's an important piece for that individual in that center circle, right? Because one of the things that you also have to realize is that as a leader, as a person, you only have so much energy, right? This goes back to Krista, what you were talking about, and I think Phil, about kind of like the deposits and withdrawals, right? To any relationship, there's only so much energy you can put to moving people from one circle or one level to another, right? So you also have to think really critically. You can't jam everybody into that would be weird to jam everybody into the intimate circle anyway, but just from like an energy standpoint, right? And what needs to go into the relationship to make it happen. So it's a great visual to think about too, in terms of investing your own emotional and relational energy, right?
Absolutely. And an understanding that sometimes you click with people right away and you move to it really fast. And with some people, some of the best relationships are ones that evolve over time. And so there's not really a time stamp that goes on that. It's all of those other components that come into it that we've discussed.
Yes. If you're a connector, it's nothing to juggle 200 close relationships. If you're more introverted and more personal, like 10 very close relationships could feel like 200.
And I like it, and it's not a good or a bad, it just isn't, it is.
Well, thank you all for joining Talking with EDU Thompson. I'm taking away 3 big takeaways. 1, being intentional about being connected. 2, making sure building trust. And 3, moving from the golden rule to the platinum rule. So thank you for joining us, and I will see you all soon.